You all may be seated. Thank you all for coming to support Sophia. My name is Amy Miller, and this is Val Ortiz and Catherine Kunis, and we are Sophia's panel today. And let's pray, and we'll get started. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for Sophia and her family and the role they took in shaping her into who she is today. I thank you for just what you've laid on her heart, and I pray that that will just be seen by everyone in the room. In Christ's name, amen.
Every person on this earth can be put into a category depending on how they operate in the world. Whether it's Myers-Briggs or Enneagrams, people can find their label. But why do people want this? The most likely reason is to give ourselves an answer for why we feel and behave the way that we do. But there's a more scientific explanation for this, something deeper that doesn't involve a few letters and numbers to define you. It starts at the beginning of our lives. The placement of your birth in your family has a direct effect on who you become. When researching this topic, I came across Dr. Kevin Leman, a psychologist who has been studying birth order since 1967. I read his birth order book, which contained an explanation of his study and an analysis of each individual person in the family. I'll give you an outline of his basic expectations of first, middle, last, and only children. Firstborn traits include being organized, competent, and natural-born leaders. This is seemingly caused by the fact that they are raised almost solely in the adult world from a young age. They mature more quickly than other birth orders because their only examples are adults, while their unpleasant traits are being bossy, perfectionist, and even lacking sensitivity. Middle children tend to be good mediators, down-to-earth, and generally relationally exceptional. This is most likely due to their habit of spending more time with their peers. They learn from their older siblings and people who are their age. Conversely, they are less driven than firstborns, and they're usually people pleasers. Youngest can make friends easily due to their strong people skills. They are usually more understanding of others' emotions and are more willing to take risks. This is because they are generally not taken seriously in the family. That is why they make up for it by being funny and kind to others. Their poorer qualities are being self-centered, having short attention spans, and strong fear of rejection. Only children behave similarly to firstborns. They have the same traits, being organized and dependable, and that is due to the same reasons the firstborns possess those traits, though they differ in their poor traits, which are being sensitive, unforgiving, and very demanding, which is a result of no consistent interaction with other children. These patterns of birth order can be seen in classic literature, like the Brothers Karamazov. The Brothers K is a story following three brothers. Dmitri exhibits the firstborn traits of desire for dominance. He knows what he wants, and he wants control. He has a sense of entitlement. Ivan holds the traits of a middleborn, his most prominent trait being his skepticism. Because he's so unsure of things, he must think outside the box to try and explain his inner turmoil. And lastly, Alyosha, the youngest brother, he's more compassionate. He has a moral compass that his brothers do not possess, yet he is still able to be personable and make conversation with them. Another example is the Narnia series. Whether it was conscious or not, Lewis wrote the characters' behavior to fit their position in the family quite perfectly. Peter, being the firstborn, is responsible and a natural-born leader. Susan, the middle child, is a functional firstborn since she is the eldest girl, but she has a practical personality. She knows what she thinks is best, and she will try her best to influence her siblings. Edmund, being the middle child, is more rebellious. He often tries to escape his family. And Lucy, being the youngest, has those basic qualities of being personable and unafraid to share her opinions. But within all these formats, there are always variables, things that can make these traits differ. The most common ones are large age gaps, siblings with physical or mental disabilities, adoptions, or blended families, which is when two families combine due to divorce and remarried parents. To start are age gaps. If a child is born 5 or more years after the last sibling, they start what is called a new family, where a lot of the times they actually inherit traits of firstborn children because they are in a way starting the family over again. Where an age gap of 7 or more years is a quasi-only child. So these people end up having more only children traits. And that is what's also called a functional firstborn. So even though they aren't actually the oldest sibling, they act in that way. A similar thing happens in cases where you're the firstborn of your gender in your family. Having an older sibling with a physical or mental disability can cause the other children to grow up quicker. Since they usually have less attention from their parents, they end up becoming little adults who are more perceptive and overall just more like firstborns. This also ties into something called role reversal, which is where two siblings effectively switch personalities of their birth orders. They are usually caused by having a disabled sibling or simply a very rebellious older sibling. Then you have the case of adoptions or newly combined families. Now, before the age of around 5 years old, there are most likely not going to be any problems. But after that age, these dynamics can cause some chaos. Since birth order stays the same at age 5, there will be lots of clashing in a newly blended family. Of course, with this many variables in place, you might question if this topic has any validity at all. I question it just the same. But it seems that the basic outlines can apply to the majority of people. Considering the different tests done, there's no denying that there's a pattern. One that Dr. Lehman talked about in his book was the four-corner exercise. This was a test he conducted at multiple of his seminars and entailed dividing his audience into 4 corners by first, middle, last, and only. Then he would tell them to chat a bit and remain in their circles. After that, he would sneakily walk around the room and place a piece of paper face down in each corner. The paper stated, "Congratulations, you are the leader of this group. Please introduce yourself to the others in your group and then have each person do the same. As you talk together, make a list of personality characteristics that you all seem to share. Be prepared to report back to the rest of the seminar with your composite picture of yourselves. Please start work immediately." He would then wait at the front of the room pretending to be busy, and seemingly everyone would be waiting for his verbal instructions. First or only borns would always find the paper first and begin their task. Not long after, the middles would follow. In most cases, the youngest group would have not even looked at the paper yet. He would then give a few-minute warning, but oftentimes the youngest would have been entertaining themselves and not even heard him. Dr. Lehman stated out of the hundreds and hundreds of times he conducted this experiment, there were only a couple of cases that didn't follow this pattern of events exactly. But overall, it is safe to say that there is reason to believe that this study is sound. So, what do we do with this information? Well, we can start by figuring out what exactly is affected in our lives. First, our careers. It's no coincidence that most presidents have been firstborn. It's almost as if they had the built-in characteristics that enable them to be fit for such a job. The same is true for any profession. Certain people are built for certain jobs. Though you aren't restricted on what your future looks like because of when you were born, these patterns are undeniable. All different jobs are needed to make our society work, and therefore different people are needed. Not only are our careers affected by this, but also who we marry. Of course, I believe love can exist in any combination of people, but interestingly, Dr. Lehman felt the need to point out which pairs of people might have a harder time together, such as 2 firstborns who usually have a power struggle because they both think they know what's best, or 2 middle children struggling with communication, or even 2 youngest children who are very fun-loving and adventurous, but Lehman claims that their irresponsibility would cause them to end up being broke. Now, relationships are far more complicated than this, so in general, the best way to explain this is simply opposites attract, though the correlation of birth order would still hold true to this statement. Another aspect of our lives that is a consequence of our position in the family is how we cope with our struggles. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking with LPC Lindsay Roush for my interview. She specializes in clients with anxiety, OCD, and addiction. One thing that did interest me during our discussion was how in familial trauma situations, the oldest child often ends up having unresolved resentment. This seems to be a result of their innate desire to be in control. So when put in these positions of no power, they end up feeling helpless. And especially in houses that dealt with addiction, those children would end up falling into that same coping mechanism. This leads to how we might act as parents. Well, simply put, being a parent is hard. And nobody is perfect, but favoritism is a trap many can succumb to. It's important to remember that children are different and therefore should be treated differently. This is another thing I talked about with Lindsay Roush. Your parenting should cater to the needs of each individual child while still giving equal treatment, which is a difficult thing, but not at all impossible. It's almost always going to have to be case by case, but the key is knowing your children well, knowing exactly what tactics work for discipline, and learning how to best help them as a person. Your goal should be to aid them in growing in every way, and even though mistakes will be made, the best thing you can do is to be conscious of all the actions that you take. One of the reasons I chose this subject is because of my own family dynamics. Since I'm not only the youngest of 6, but I have an age gap of 8 years. So I am considered a quasi-only child, which as stated earlier means I am a functional firstborn with only child traits. Though there is something important that Dr. Lehman seemed to leave out of his books, and that is very large families. Even though I should be a functional only child, there is the fact that I've always had at least one of my siblings living with me at a time my whole life, which seems like it would complicate the dynamics a little bit more. Since I'm a particular complex case, there's not much more I can do to explain to you the way that I am, though I'm sure I would be a birth order psychologist's playground or maybe nightmare. So, from all of this evidence, it is safe to concur that where you were born in your family does in fact have an effect on your life. Even with all the variables, there's always a psychological explanation for this. But even knowing this, we must remember we are all individuals and all children of God. And we must remember that no matter what category or personality test you take, they aren't restricting you. We should never use them as an excuse for continued bad behavior. Though things like the birth order study aid us in understanding why we are the way we are, it will always be on us to become better. So I encourage you to use the information that you find out about you as an individual to acknowledge your strengths and utilize them, and discover your weaknesses so that you may improve yourself. And though this really does seem like a reason that you can keep acting a certain way because you can't help it, we do still have free will. And we should never stop striving to be like Christ and harness the gifts that God gave us to better ourselves. Psalms 139:13-14. For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Good job. So, what are your plans post-MCA?
I'll be attending Texas Tech, and I'm going for an energy commerce major.
Okay. So what led you, or what sparked this topic in your idea as you started exploring senior thesis?
I think it was one of those things where, I mean, obviously from a young age, I've been a little bit different with my family dynamics. So it's always just interested me, but I've never really taken the time to like research it or understand like what is affecting me. So I guess this was kind of an opportunity to like dive a little deeper into that.
Okay. So as you read the book, and you said, and then you kind of learned that you stated certain people are built for certain jobs. Mm-hmm. So if you were a tutor at MCA and you heard this oral, and you were to and you have a group project coming up, how would you take this information of birth order and kind of assign groups for a group presentation or a group project?
So you mean like dividing your class up for a group? I guess just taking everyone like evenly. Like obviously there's going to be more extroverted kids.
Like somebody, God decided, okay, I'm going to put this many firstborns in this class and this many secondborns and this many lastborns. And he orchestrates that. Mm-hmm. And then you get to put them all in.
I mean, I guess I would just divide them evenly. Like
who would do what?
Oh,
what
which
role
group would do what?
Yeah. What role would each person in the group have?
That's a hard one. I would say firstborns definitely need to do the research and like organize, like if they're doing like a group project. Mm-hmm. Youngest should do the creative stuff probably, like making all of the slides and doing the presentations or whatever. Okay. I don't know what middle children would do actually. Kind of forgotten. Makes sense. But only children, I don't even know. They're also kind of like that too. But maybe more like they would work with the oldest children because like, you know.
Okay. Because I was thinking more of along the line, like, and usually when there's a group project in a class, there's usually the freeloader that doesn't do their part. Yeah. Which birth order do you think that falls in most of the time?
The youngest.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, because I was the last born, and that was my MO. So how do you get that person? Do you stick the firstborn on them? How do you get them?
Well, no, because they need to learn how to be independent and be able to do those projects on their own.
Okay. Okay, and we're going to stick with MCA and students. And so here's the other thing that I was just thinking about as I was reading through your oral. So most of the time at MCA, when students don't make it academically, it's not because they don't have the aptitude. It's usually some other variable. And so what do you think would cause what's the struggle for each of the birth orders, you think?
Like in school specifically?
And specifically at MCA and not being able to handle the academic load.
That's an interesting one. I would say maybe the middle children generally might struggle a little bit more with the community part of it.
Okay.
I don't know why, like, specifically for MCA, just because, like, I don't know, just for here, like, oldest and youngest children, I think get more attention.
Okay.
But that's not necessarily true everywhere else. So
what do you think would be the struggle for a firstborn?
I'm not sure. Maybe, well, I mean, generally they are more perfectionists, so that might be something they struggle with, because a lot of the times the oldest child does set the tone for, like, grades and stuff. So if another child is, you know, not just built different, like they don't do math as well as that person, then it can be a little bit hard to, you know, cope with that.
Okay. And then what about lastborn?
Maybe that sort of same connection of, like, living up to the oldest siblings.
Okay. And so they just don't try because they can't achieve that.
Exactly.
Okay. That's fair. And so you mentioned Brothers K and Chronicles of Narnia, and you mentioned you didn't know if the authors did a deep dive in birth orders and brought that into the story. Are there other stories that you've read where maybe the characters didn't fit these tendencies, you think?
I don't know, actually. I think most authors subconsciously do tend to, like, just follow that same format because that's what's true most of the time. Okay. And so it makes sense to write your characters in that way because that's what's true in the real world.
Okay. That's good because that kind of leads me to my next. So you know, we've talked about this off and on throughout the year, and one of the stories in the Bible, after I read your paper, that I was curious about is the story of Moses and do you know his siblings' name? That you have Miriam, the big sister. Yeah. You have Aaron, who's the middle. Do you know what Aaron's known for?
I don't remember.
So God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh to let his people go. And Moses' response is, I'm not a good speaker, or the people of Israel's not going to listen to me. And so he goes and recruits his brother to be his mouthpiece. And then Moses is the natural born leader that everyone is. He's the one that's going to lead the people of Israel back to the promised land. And so they all kind of, so Miriam, Aaron, and Moses, they follow the tendencies or the norms of birth order that you brought out. But Moses didn't grow up with. Remember, he grew up in Pharaoh's house. So do you think it was instinct, or was it just God divinely orchestrating his environment that he grew up with, that they kind of fell in line with this?
Wow. I honestly think it's probably both. Just like, I mean, God obviously designed, like, the way that we are. So the way that his instincts worked was, you know, divine, but also just, like, human nature, I would say.
Okay. And so I'm gonna pass before and then come back to some other thoughts.
Beautiful job. I kind of want to go off of what Miss Miller's talking about just a biblical example, because I also thought of a biblical example, but it's completely different. And it's about Ishmael and Isaac. So they're the brothers. Father was Abraham. And so Ishmael, he's the firstborn, right? And then Isaac, he's the secondborn. And do you know what happens with Isaac? Yeah, so he's the descendants which everybody came through, right? And so, all the Jewish people were gonna lead to. And so obviously this example, there's different aspects to it, but a question that kind of came to mind whenever I was thinking about these brothers is that the second was kind of put in this leadership position. Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure with that specific case, because I'm sure that's just God's plan. Like, he knew exactly from the beginning what he wanted to do with them. But I did talk a little bit about role reversal in siblings, where it's like you just like completely like switch. And it may have just been like that's what he was called to do, and like Ishmael was not. So
Yeah,
that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, because also just will you remind us like what the firstborn like character traits are, and then the second or the youngest?
So I mean, the firstborn, they're definitely more like confident. They have like the perfectionist type. They're usually more like leader driven. And then youngest or middle are going to be a little bit different with their priorities, I would say usually. Like youngest are more, they're extroverted still. And then middles would be more introverted. But
and then also something that's interesting about these brothers is the name Isaac. It means the one who laughs. And so I just thought that was funny because it is kind of like that second trait of like somebody that's, or the youngest, that somebody that's like filled with life, or like so how you describe just like more like easygoing. And so I don't know, I thought that was interesting. And another aspect to Ishmael and Isaac is that it says that Ishmael, whenever he was born, Abraham was 86 years old, and then when Isaac was born, Abraham was 100 years old. So there's that 14-year gap. And so thinking about that family, what do you think that 14-year difference, the effects that it had in that family, like?
I mean, like a gap that big is gonna cause some like distance, obviously, but in the way that probably helped Isaac grow up a little quicker, just because of like the whole dynamic of growing up with like adults and only learning from them. It probably helped him have like those firstborn traits of being a leader by just learning from like Abraham. So
yeah, that's good. Okay, kind of switching gears a little bit. So something that you said in the beginning was just how the placement of your birth in your family has a direct effect on who you become. And then you kind of talked a little bit about how you were a quasi-only child. And so my question is just, how has that led you to who you are today?
I don't know, honestly. I feel like since mine is really complicated, I still honestly have no idea what's going on up here. But I think I do have those some firstborn traits. Like, definitely recently I haven't been as much, but my whole life being like a perfectionist with like school and stuff like that. But I don't know. I do have, they would say, youngest child traits, being the baby, but I don't know, just like a little bit of everything. And it's kind of contradictory at times, but yeah.
What about just more specifically this year? Like, where do you feel your traits fall more in when it comes to the different characteristics?
I don't know, honestly. They really are just like always changing, to be honest. I don't know.
That's okay. Okay, so with your family and how your family communicates, how would you say, what would you say the difference is between how you communicate with your parents and how your siblings communicate with your parents?
That's a good question. They're laughing at me because I can be a lot more direct than the rest of my siblings, I think. And I think sometimes I ask for a little bit more, usually, than my oldest siblings, who are like very like, why would you ask that? Like, why would you, they say take advantage sometimes. But it's just, I think they also grew up in a different generation, literally. So I think the way that I talk to my parents now would not have happened if I was born 30 years ago.
That's good. Okay. Something that also came to mind whenever I was thinking about just birth order and family communication patterns. There's actually this study, it's called Family Communication Style. And so there's 4 different communication styles within a family, and they're basically based off of conformity and conversation. So conformity meaning like rules, and then conversation meaning of like how much you communicate with your parents. And this is like child to parent. And so here, I actually brought a little sticky note so you can look at it as I kind of explain. But so the protective communication style is like low conversation, high conformity. So it's kind of like that helicopter parent. The consensual communication style is high conversation, high conformity. So that means that there's a lot of talking and also a lot of rules. But the child is able to ask why are these rules being in place and stuff like that, and have a conversation about that. And then there's the laissez-faire family communication, which is low conversation, low conformity. So that's really just the child is very independent from the parent. And then the pluralistic family communication style, which is high conversation, low conformity. So there's a lot of conversation, and the child feels as if they can communicate with their parent, but then also there's not a lot of rules, so they can get away with a lot of stuff. And so just with these 4 communication styles, when it comes to your family, do you feel like your family falls into kind of one, or it's dependent on the sibling? Does it differ within the sibling within the time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of like a lot of the different ones, honestly, just for all of us separately. I have no idea which one I would fall under. I think it just changes over time also, just with how like, well, stupid the freedom be, basically, like, sorry.
No,
but
that's
like,
good, that's good.
As I get older, like, I can talk more about like, why do I have this rule? Like, why do I have to do this or this? But when I was younger, I just have to be like, okay. Yeah. But it makes sense that it works that way, so.
Also, just like more specifically with your siblings, like whenever you were growing up, did you feel as if your parents talked and parented your siblings in a different way than you?
I don't know, actually. Definitely like a little bit different, just because of like the whole different generation thing too, of like, I would say they were more like protective type, the more helicopter parent probably for like the oldest ones, just because I think that's also something where it's like when you have a firstborn child, you're like, I need to protect this child with all of my might and like make sure they make all the right decisions and everything. And like you still want that for your other children, but when it's your first one, I think it's just a little bit different. There's a little more pressure on that. So I think it dwindles a little bit as you get to your 6th child, so.
Yeah, that's good, that's good. Okay, so Miss Miller and I, we're both twins. And so I just want to know like your thoughts over what you think of twins. Like, do you think that twins share the characteristics of being the oldest, or wherever they fall in line, the youngest for Miss Miller, or do you think it could be like a blend of both?
Yeah, so I tried doing like research on this. It is so like controversial apparently. Different psychologists have completely opposite opinions on like what is going on with twins in birth order psychology. Some of them say like twins are the only ones that any of the rules apply to. Some of them say that they're the only ones that rules don't apply to. I personally would say that it is more like very similar, because you're growing up in the same environment. So it makes sense that you would, have the same perspective and things like that. But there's just, I would say, a lot more variables that could happen specifically with twins.
Yeah, yes. Because, for example, myself, it's just my brother and I, and I'm a minute older, and I think I'm the oldest. So
you can tell him I said that if you want to.
Okay, I will. I'll make sure he watches this. Just, yeah. Okay. I guess there are different variables and stuff like that, but to identical and fraternal, did anything stick out to you whenever you were looking into the twins?
Not really, honestly. It was like all very confusing. No, nothing else other than just like generally I think most people sort of agree that like you're growing up in the same environment, usually in like, you know, you're like the oldest or like the youngest, like you're in the same position together. And so the together part has an effect on it, but you're still in the same environment. So
That's cool. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Almost there. Okay, I want to ask one more question about your family's complex birth order dynamics. Do you think that any of your siblings don't fit like the typical mold for their birth order spot?
No, I actually think they fit it pretty well, because it's like there's an oldest boy and then oldest girl, and she's a functional firstborn. So, because she's like the first of like the girls in our family, and then there's like the two middles, both different genders, and then there's the youngest, Hannah, and then 8 years later I was born. So we're both like youngest, but I'm also like a functional firstborn. I think it fits pretty well actually. So
You're just the only weird one?
yeah,
Doesn't
pretty
fit in
much.
their
Everyone else
birth
is
order.
normal.
Okay, why should your audience care about birth order? Why does birth order psychology matter?
Just like with any of like these sorts of studies, it's something that like if you study and you understand yourself better, that's where change starts, is to just acknowledge something. So like I said in my conclusion, just understanding your strengths so that you can utilize them, because you should be, and then discovering your weaknesses so that you can better yourself, so that you can, you know, cope with those in a way, and like understand why you feel that way and how you can help that. But yeah.
That's a good answer. Should we also consider birth order when we're thinking about interacting with other people, like our friends or classmates, and how to love others well? Should we consider their birth order?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I mean, honestly, no. Because everyone's so different, and you aren't going to be able to psychoanalyze all of them, that it's like, over time, you do just like understand like, oh, this person thinks about this way, and like it probably is because they're like a youngest child or something. But I don't think you have to have that in the forefront of your mind when interacting with people. So
That makes sense. Okay, do you think does birth order influence like our approach to learning or problem solving?
I would say that definitely is like a case by case thing, because some people, their minds are just wired to like be good at math or something. But it is a lot of the time like what I talked about earlier, like the oldest child usually being like more willing to like accomplish more and like more driven. So I would say that sort of plays into it also.
Cool. Okay, you mentioned that it's not a coincidence that a lot of presidents have been firstborns. I'm curious, are there any other like typical careers for firstborns or other spots in the birth order?
Yeah, so actually in the book, Dr. Lehman talked about how a lot of salesmen are youngest children, which makes sense because the youngest children can usually talk your ear off and get the way that they want things. So they can sell you whatever, because they have like that practice of, you know, arguing with their parents and their siblings. So
Is that why you're gonna go into energy commerce?
yeah.
I don't really know what that means actually, but commerce sounds
I'll have to
kind
talk
of
to
like
people, so.
sales. What about middle children?
I don't know.
Just forgotten.
Those are even in the book, Dr. Lehman was like, yeah, I can't honestly figure out middle children. Like they're kind of just like out of nowhere, like, because they can go like one way or the other kind of intensely, but I don't know. Middle children, I feel like, would be really good with computers for some reason.
Cool. You've also mentioned that you talked about like relationships, like married couples, and how sometimes like if an oldest marries an oldest, like there could be conflict, or youngest and youngest, etc. Did you come across in your research, like, what's the ideal combo?
Generally, it's like opposites attract rule. So it's like youngest, middle, or youngest, oldest, or like only middle, that sort of thing. But there's not like one perfect one.
What if you had to choose
Oh,
the best combination? What do you think, based on the traits that you read
maybe
about?
maybe oldest, youngest, since it's just like those are like the opposite, literally. So
Yeah, balance each other out. Okay. You like the Lord of the Rings, right?
I do.
Okay. I'm curious what you think about some of your favorite characters from the Lord of the Rings and how birth order psychology might apply to them. Like, if you know their birth order, then how do you see those traits or not see them? If you don't know their birth order, what would you guess they are based on their traits?
I'm trying to think. Not many of them have like siblings or anything, which is interesting. I don't know. Frodo definitely gives only child vibes.
How come?
just vibes. Like you can just tell, because like he obviously has like, you know, he has an understanding of like his role and stuff. That's sort of like firstborn type, you know, energy. But then also you can tell he doesn't have siblings just because of the way that he talks to people. I think it's just a little bit different.
Does he talk to himself? Isn't that a trait of only children?
Really?
That they do that more often?
That's kind of scary. I don't know if he talks to himself in that way. I don't remember actually. I'm trying to think of anyone else that's like for sure screaming. And well, I guess Aragorn, he definitely has oldest child, you know, energy.
Vibes.
Yeah, vibes.
What are some of those characteristics?
Because
Besides
he's like
vibes?
a natural leader. So I think that fits pretty well.
Cool. Okay, I have one last question before I hand it back to Mrs. Miller. Do you know where I fall in my birth order? Okay, what's your guess and why?
Oh. Wait, I think you have one sibling and you're older. Is that true?
Yeah. Wait, why?
I don't know.
Just my vibes?
Yeah.
My energy?
That's kind of crazy. I was not expecting that to be right.
Yeah, way to go.
Wow.
All right, thanks, Sophie.
That's impressive. Okay, so I got one more question for you. I giggled when I was reading your paper and you were kind of giving the youngest characteristics, because even though I'm a twin, we're the last borns, and I definitely have characteristics of a last born. Mr. Miller is also a last born, and so you pretty much nailed us as far as when we first got married, we were very self-centered. The short attention span hasn't changed. And the strong fear of rejection, we both share in that. Anyway, but when we first got married, that was a struggle. And so, and you were saying, and you talked about kind of what the struggles might be for two firstborns if they were to get married. So if you were friends with us back when we were dating, and with all of your information, would you have set us down and say, look, guys, y'all don't need to do this. You're both last borns. It's not going to work. How would you have coached us through that?
I think one of the things that's necessary is to just understand the other person's emotions. And I think since you're both that way, you're probably feeding off each other's.
Yeah.
But I think in the same way, that's how you can get better, is that you understand how you feel and you're understanding how the other person is feeling. So that, in a way, that's kind of helpful with like communication and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we weren't that mature about it. But so you wouldn't say, hey, so if you have a friend coming up and she's dating a firstborn and she's a firstborn, you're not going to tell her,
No.
don't go down that path.
No.
You would help them see that it can.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
good. All right, so it's your turn. You get to ask us a question.
Yay. Okay, I wanted to ask, if you could choose to be born in a different position in the family, what would you choose? Or if you wouldn't change it, then why? Also, what's your favorite color?
Okay, I'll start with my favorite color. It's periwinkle. Because the one, it's fun to say, and then it's pretty. Okay, there's no way I'd want to be a firstborn. It's like I always tell my son, Cade, it's like, oh my gosh, because we didn't know anything. Like, he come along and we knew nothing. We were figuring it out as we go along. And so I wouldn't want to be firstborn for sure. I don't think I would change it. Lastborn's a pretty good gig. It's very little is expected and lots is just done for you. You don't have to do a whole lot. I like it. I like being lastborn.
My favorite color is pink and orange.
Nice.
And I wouldn't change my birth order because I like that because I'm a twin and because I don't have any other siblings, I don't fit into a box.
Yeah.
My favorite color is green, and I would change to be a twin also. This isn't really a different spot in the birth order, but it's different.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just curious about it.
Yeah.
Seems fun.
I get that.
What about you?
Oh, well, my favorite color is lavender, and I don't know if I would change it. If I would change it, it would be like a middle child. Since I've had like the experience of kind of being the center of attention, I'd want the experience. I think I'd want the experience of being kind of like looked over.
All right.
Yeah.
On that note, I'll pray for you, and then Father, thank you so much for just getting together this evening and hear from Sophie and all the things that she has learned throughout the year researching this topic, Lord, and thank you for the wisdom that she shared with us today. I pray for her moving forward as she's beginning a new season of life, that you would be near to her and just guide her path, and that you would lead her. Yeah, we're so thankful for Sophie and for the way she's impacted MCA and all that she got to share this evening. It's in your son's name I pray. Amen.